Hey guys, we are starting part 5 of The Trojan War by Olivia Coolidge. We just read a really emotional story about Achilles and how he finally got over his grief. Um, we're going to move right on through the story to part 5, the close of the war. Moving right along. Okay, let's start it. The Queen of the Amazons. Girl power. See what we got. Men were running to lift down their weapons from the wall and hastily putting on their armor. Once more the rumbling of chariots and the neighing of horses were heard in the streets of Troy. For many days after the death of Hector, the leaderless Trojans had despaired of ever driving the Greeks into the sea. Deiphobus and Helenus, now the greatest of the princes, were hardly friends with one another, though they both resented the rivalry of Aeneas, since he was not one of Priam's sons. The peace party, headed by Polydamas and Antenor, was openly seeking support from the people, even though no one could suggest any terms the victorious Greeks would be likely to accept. Discouraged and frightened, the Trojans had huddled inside the walls of their city, where they might soon have been closely besieged if Achilles had not held back the Greeks in order to give Priam a breathing space for celebrating Hector's funeral. So not only did he give his body back, he paused the whole war. Achilles paused the whole war so that Priam, Hector's dad, could hold a funeral. What a change of heart. What a character development. 12 days were now over, and contrary to all expectations, the Trojans were going out again to war. In the midst of doubting and despair, a new champion had come to their aid. This woman's name is Penthesilea, Queen of the Amazons, a nation of warrior women. She was even now riding across the great square on her way from the palace of Priam to the Scaean gate amid the cheers of the men and women who thronged the streets. Only white-faced Andromache watched doubtfully, half hidden behind the colonnade of Hector's house. Hector was a warrior, she said softly, but this is a young girl as slender as I. How can she be a match for Achilles, as she boasts? She does not really understand war. For a moment, the townspeople had forgotten Hector, absorbed in this new wonder which had appeared to save them. Penthesilea sat astride a fiery white horse, and from the waving crest of her helmet to the sandals on her feet she glittered with gold. Slender though she was, she easily carried a round shield with 2 javelins fastened behind it, while her right hand grasped a huge spear. From a broad belt across her shoulders hung a sword and a scabbard of ivory and silver. She appeared to wear her heavy armor and to manage her horse with the lightness and grace of the huntress Artemis. Behind her rode a guard of Amazons, 2 and 2. All were young, but none rivaled the queen, whose helmet was pushed back on her forehead, uncovering her lovely face, delicately flushed with excitement as she raised her spear in answer to the Trojan cheers. I like her. The great gates were swinging open, and soon the shouting crowds of Trojans were swarming out to battle. Penthesilea set her horse to a gallop, and with a wild cry she and her guards tore across the plain, followed by the rocking chariots of the princes and the rabble of light-armed troops racing behind them on foot. Scouts rushed into the camp of the Greeks to find the army unbelieving and unprepared. "They will not dare to challenge us seriously," said Achilles to Ajax, who stood with him by the mound of Patroclus, making sacrifices to the spirit of the dead. "They have been too terribly beaten to be dangerous. There is no need to interrupt our rites." Elsewhere in the camp, men rushed to their arms and poured out onto the plain confusedly, each when he was ready. Penthesilea, with her maidens behind her, fell on them like the goddess of war. The first to meet the onset of the Amazons were the men of Protesius, led by Podocras, the dead hero's brother. 6 of these fell to the queen's spear and were trampled beneath the red hooves of her plunging horse. What do you think they were red? It was blood. She's like a killing machine. I really like her. Meantime, Clonny, the maiden on her right hand, laid low Menopus, Podocrates' greatest friend, and at that Podocrates himself, with a great shout, aimed his spear at Clonny and hurled her dying from her horse. Penthesilea, turning on him like a fury, stabbed him through the arm. The blood spurted forth like a fountain, and Podocrates died in his friend's arms as he was being carried out of the battle. She got an artery. He bled out. That's the only way you can die, from getting cut in the arm. Arterial blood. Oof. At the loss of their leader, the men facing the Amazon turned to flee with cries of dismay. They were, however, caught between the Amazons and the Greek forces, still pushing out onto the battle, so that many of them died from a thrust in the back or turned to face their enemies unprotected, since they had thrown away their shields. In vain did Diomed leap forward and take the life of a maiden as the group rode thundering past. In vain did fresh forces run up to the rescue. The main body of Trojans was up to the Amazons by now, and their impetus was not to be stayed. The Greeks were rolled back to their camp with the great white horse of Penthesilea racing at the head of the pursuit. As the roar of battle rolled down on the Greek camp, Achilles and Ajax, roused by the noise, issued from the gate like 2 lions and charged on the advancing foes. The Greeks rallied with them and fell on the Amazons, who were soon entangled in a mass of men, among whom their desperate valor did fearful execution. Achilles and Ajax cut through the throng toward Penthesilea, killing as they went. She, seizing one of her javelins, hurled it at Achilles, but saw it shatter to fragments against the shield a god had made. Remember where he got his armor. Swift as a flash, she plucked forth the second and aimed it at Ajax, but in her haste her aim was poor. The weapon glanced off his silver greave, and the giant laughed at her as he plunged past to fall on the Trojans behind her. Achilles flung up his spear and hit Penthesilea full in the breast. She rocked in the saddle, fumbling blindly for her sword. Long before she could draw it, however, the hero stabbed upward at the plunging horse with such force that the spear went right through the beast and rider. What? Sword went straight through the horse and Penthesilea. Gross! Both fell with a crash to the earth. The Trojans turned and fled desperately, their short-lived courage entirely gone. Oh, man. Achilles, however, did not join the pursuit. "Foolish woman," said he, stooping over the dead queen's body. "Who persuaded you that you were strong enough to fight with men?" I don't like that comment, Achilles. He wrenched off her helmet roughly and then stopped it with his hand, staring. The queen lay lovely and fresh as a wild rose on the blood-stained field. Her beautiful lips were parted a little as though she still breathed, and her soft hair had fallen about her shoulders, shining in the sun. Achilles straightened up slowly, still looking at her. "It is a pity that one so fair should die so young," he said. "Had I been fated to go home with the Myrmidons and be a king at my father's room, what better queen could I have set by my side than this girl with the gallantry of a warrior and the beauty of a nymph? I could have loved her, but instead I have killed her. The price of glory is high indeed, for it is always brought by death. Gilly's learning some hard lessons this war. That's the end of the chapter, guys. That was a good one. Man. But I hoped she would have stayed around for a little while longer.